Welcome to Rhyme and Reason, hosted by Dr. Barry. Today, Barry welcomes author and entrepreneur, Kara Goldin. And now, here's Dr. Barry Ryman.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Rhyme and Reason podcast. Episode number 26 has officially begun. We've had a bad run over the last 2 weeks or so with, kind of having to think on the fly. Our guest last week, unfortunately, who we will have on, wound up in the emergency room with his son. And so we found that out about 2 minutes before we went live, and my producer, Greg, so graciously filled in. And it turned out, in my opinion, to be a pretty cool episode. But today, have you ever heard the term kind of outkicking your coverage? I took a shot in the dark. I have followed our guest that's going to be on today for the better part of a number of years on LinkedIn. And she always has like really inspiring posts and just what comes across as a very energetic and dynamic personality. And I reached out, my theory is like, what if you have to lose? So I reached out to Kara, and she graciously agreed to come on. And this is probably our busiest guest we've ever had on. Between running a company, having her own podcast that she does 3 days a week. She has a lot on her plate. Kara is the founder of Hint Incorporated, which is obviously best known for its Hint water. She's also the author of Undaunted. She's been recognized by numerous publications, including Forbes, Ernst and Young. She's regarded as one of the most successful female entrepreneurs in the United States of America. I do want to add one other thing. I pulled up her About Me section on LinkedIn, and this really stuck out to me. The Huffington Post listed her as one of 6 disruptors in business alongside Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg. Now, for me, that statement alone and for her just to be mentioned in that company with those level of entrepreneurs is what I would think is an honor, but, we'll ask her about it, and maybe she can give me a little hint on what that's like. So, Greg, let's bring on Kara. Hi, Kara.
Hello. Great to be here.
It is so good to have you. As I'm sure you just heard, I took a stab in the dark trying to get you on here. And what's the old saying? If you stick enough shit to the wall, eventually something sticks. And to be honest, like, I didn't even expect you to respond, which tells me a lot about you, because I'm sure you get hit up by a lot of people. And I'm not one of those guys that solicits. I don't like to solicit. And I think I even mentioned that on my message. Like, you are the first higher profile guest that I've quote unquote solicited without the intention of soliciting. I just have been following you for so long, and not in a stalker type way, but just in a way that I really admire the work that you do. I admire what you share with the world through LinkedIn, and I admire your story overall. And I'm very curious. I really want to hear it. I don't know if you came out of your parents' womb and decided I'm going to be an entrepreneur, right? So first off, thank you. I know it's a little early for you guys. You're out in California. I'm on the East Coast, so I'm already hungry for lunch. I'm not sure if you've had breakfast yet, but hopefully you've had some coffee. And I just want to thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here with us today.
Well, what a nice intro. So thank you so much. I've already done my hike this morning. I live in the Marin Headlands. And so I always start my day with enjoying nature and getting out there. And we're finally seeing rain in the Bay Area, which we've needed desperately. So we're quite happy.
Yeah, what's that been like? I mean, have there been? I've been hearing about the drought, the fire. I mean, are you guys safe where you're at?
100%. I mean, we're, definitely in terms of the fires. I mean, we really haven't, nothing this time is that close to where we are. But it's, definitely been a little scary how dry it is. Actually, it was interesting on Nextdoor. Are you familiar with that service?
Yeah. The app. Yep.
I always love Nextdoor, and it's pretty big in Marin County. In fact, the CEO of Nextdoor she doesn't live next door, but she just lives a few doors down from me, and so we always chuckle about that. But there was a bear and a mountain lion that came, and not a mountain lion, sorry, a bobcat that came off of the hills, and it really speaks to the fact that they're hungry, right? That when it's drought time, they're looking for food, and they come down, and so they're walking around and getting on porches. So there's always really good videos with the Ring apps and everything else out there. So it's entertaining. It's a whole new source of content for everyone to take a look at. Fun.
I love seeing that stuff. When you take your hikes, do you have those little bells you wear on your shoelaces on your shoes to keep the bears away? I mean, this is a whole new level of hiking now when you're mentioning bobcats and bears. Like, it seems like a really great idea to wake up in the morning and go for a leisurely hike. But, if you have hungry bears out there, I don't want to see anything happen to you.
I have 3 Labradors. And so two of them are puppies. So everybody's very leashed. Otherwise, I think if they saw somebody, they would chase after them for sure. But definitely, it's for me just being in nature, and I have 100 acres of trails in the Marin Headlands where I have access to it. So, but again, I think more than anything, when we see, we see what's going on in nature, it's like we sort of are happy about the rain and being able to get it here versus, knowing that if we do get some sort of some sort of fire coming, that at least the grounds will be pretty wet. So anyway,
not for that.
Go ahead.
I'm not like super familiar with the geography of actual California. Are you in Silicon Valley?
No, so that's south of San Francisco, and we're just north of San Francisco. So I'm about 20 minutes over the bridge. And,
okay, gotcha.
So just over the Golden Gate Bridge and into Marin County. It's filled with lots of farm to table places, and we're about halfway between Napa and Sonoma and the city in San Francisco. So it's a great place to be if you really like nature.
It's beautiful. Are you and your husband Warriors fans?
We enjoy the Warriors, although I can't say that we've actually been too often since the new stadium has.
I hear it's really nice.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. I mean, they did a really, really nice job on it. So
that's awesome. Okay, so I want to know a little bit about you just as a person, not you today, but kind of what led you to where you're at today. Maybe a little bit about, if you're comfortable sharing, about your early life. What were your aspirations when you were younger? I mean, I look back to my childhood, and I didn't ever foresee myself in business. I wound up in business, but I took kind of a weird path to get there. I went and got a doctorate. I became a doctor of psychology, and now I don't even really practice. I'm pretty much immersed on the business side of addiction treatment. But I remember being, 4 or 5 years old, and I said, I think, I grew up here in South Florida. I was born in Miami, and I wanted to be a marine biologist. Mm-hmm. Like, did you have sights set from a very young age that you wanted to be an entrepreneur, or what did your early life look like, and kind of what led you down on the path that got you to where you're at today?
So I grew up in Arizona. I was in Phoenix, Scottsdale area. And, when I went there, when I grew up there, it was, I always joke that I was an early settler. And so my dad had this big idea that we were going to leave the snow. We were in Minneapolis, and we were going to go to Arizona. And there were only like 100,000 people in the Phoenix and Scottsdale area. I mean, it was pretty, totally dating myself at this point, but this is in the 70s, and it was, it was pretty quiet. And I think being the last of 5 kids, we have kind of 2 separate families, although all the same parents. But my brother and sister are 15 and 16 years older than me. I have a brother that's 3 years older and a sister that's 2 years older. And, it's interesting because when you grow up with a kind of the age differences that I had, I was able to watch them go through things that are, adult, right? So they were getting their first jobs. They were, learning to drive, all of these things. And I felt like one of the things that really sort of swayed me into thinking about my first job out of college, or what I thought was going to be my first job out of college, was my brother, who's 15 years older than me, because all he wanted to be was a lawyer. And so I'm like, I'm going to be a lawyer too. And both of us liked to banter and like talk and argue at times. And so I was like, I'm going to be a great lawyer. Like, tell me all about law. And so, it's funny because he is a lawyer, and obviously I'm not a lawyer, but I married a lawyer he says is a recovering lawyer. He only practiced for about 10 years, and then he decided he wasn't going to do that. But, more than anything, I think when somebody inspires you, when somebody is doing something that maybe they're passionate about, but they really inspire you, like my brother did, I felt like that was sort of the key reason why I thought I was probably going to go to law school. But everybody had told me, don't go right out of college. Like, take a couple of years and then apply and go to law school. So when I left college, I really I was a journalism major, and I had a minor in finance, and I thought, I'm going to go be a journalist, and I'm going to go and write. And more than anything, I was super interested in writing about business and finance. It just was, so much learning for me. I talk a lot about how, finance was never easy for me, but then when I started taking classes in finance, it just sort of clicked. And so I thought, maybe I'm going to actually go and do something where I can combine both of those interests, writing with finance. So I tried to get a job with Fortune magazine. And I had also been very inspired by, I don't know, maybe it was the movies or something about New York City. It was, for me, like, I'm going to go there and I'm going to, I don't know,
You're going to make it big.
I'm going to make it big, and I'm going to go there. I'd never been to New York. We didn't travel that much as a big family. So when I decided that I was going to go and get this job at Fortune magazine, one of the stories I share in my book was I wrote a letter to the managing editor of Fortune, who is was a gentleman named Marshall Loeb. Isn't that how you get a job? You just write to them and tell them that you graduated and you love Fortune magazine and you'd really love to come and work for him. And he wrote me this very nice letter back, or I assumed he wrote the letter. Everybody else said, oh no, he didn't write that letter. Somebody else wrote it for him. But he said, if you're ever in the New York area, let me know. I'd love to meet you. And so I took that as an invitation.
I'll be there next week.
I'll be there next week. And so a little bit went on in between there, but I bought a ticket to go to New York, and I figured I'll set up some other interviews along the way. I ended up deciding to, once I knew I was going to New York, I was going to go to Boston and Chicago and Los Angeles, and that's a whole other story along the way. But when I got to New York, I went into the Time and Life building where Fortune was housed, and there was no security there. You walked, into the elevator, asked a few people, where is Fortune magazine? There was no way to get up to that floor.
Just for a timeline, what year was this? Do you remember?
1989.
89. Okay.
So, so I'm getting into the elevator, and then I just asked somebody, well, is there an HR department? And they said, oh, yeah. And so they told me where that was. So I walked into the HR department. I had my letter. This is before emails and
Yeah.
everything else. So I walked into the HR department and I said, I'm here to see Marshall Loeb. And, here I am, fresh out of college. The poor woman who is the receptionist in the Time and Life building in the HR offices said, do you have an appointment?
Did he know you were coming?
No, because I just figured I had, I had this.
You got the open invite. Yep. Okay.
It was an open invite.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll come back if he can't see me, whatever. But I figured, what the heck, right? I didn't exactly know what my schedule was going to be, but I got there at like 9:30 in the morning. And so she didn't know what to do with me. And I took out my letter from Marshall and I showed it to her, and she called her manager. The manager came out. She called her manager and she said, I don't know what to do. I mean, should we call him? And so then the head of HR for all of Time and Life came out and she said, I'm so sorry to tell you this, but they do not have any openings for entry level people. There's nothing at Fortune magazine. And I said, oh, that's really too bad. I, have this letter from Marshall. And I very quickly said, well, is there anything else in the building? Because I figured there were a lot of people going in and out. There were other magazines. There was Sports Illustrated. There was People magazine and Time magazine and Life magazine, of course. And so she said, well, what are you looking for? And I said, ideally, I'm looking to write, but I mean, I'll do anything. It'd just be so amazing to work inside of this building. I had this energy and this feeling for, and I was there. I was in New York. And
you were undaunted.
I was undaunted, but I didn't really know what I was saying, right? Like I got there. I didn't plan on somebody saying no to me. I thought there was a chance, but I didn't know if they said no. I didn't know what I was going to say. But what I said is, put me in the game, right? Like, what else can I do?
Waterboy.
Right. And so so probably a conversation happened right before I got there from an executive who said, I've been looking for an executive assistant for a long time, and you guys aren't making it happen. And so she wanted to put the fire out. And so she said, would you be interested in an executive assistant level role? I knew what an executive assistant role was, but it wasn't on my agenda to do. And I said, sure. Because I figured at some point, if I could just get my foot in the door, then I could actually maybe go meet Marshall Loeb and
work your way up.
And work my way up. And so when I met with Brooke McMurray, Brooke was like, wait, how did you get here? I just got a phone call that said you're in the building and that you were going to come and interview with me. And so I told her the story. I said, well, I'm a, journalism major with a finance minor, and I wrote to Marshall Loeb, and she was dying. I mean, she just could not believe. She said, wait a minute, you flew yourself here from Arizona. This is a riot. And I said, yeah, it's really crazy. And I've been on this trip for a month and going and interviewing with all these different companies. It ended up to be a 3-hour interview. And she said, we need you to work here. I mean, this is just, I love your energy. I love everything. Look, executive assistant role, you'll, do a great job for us, and then we'll figure out what else you can be doing. I didn't know whether or not I was going to get the job or not, but when I went back to Arizona the next day, I got an offer. And that's when I said, I'm in, right? I'm going to go. Maybe I'll find my way into Fortune. Maybe I won't. I never did. Not until they wrote a story about me.
Who was Brooke an executive for?
So she ran this division called circulation. It's funny because I think she, told me what circulation was. I don't recall that I actually knew what circulation was when I left the interview. So if you're in that spot where you're like, okay, I'm a little fuzzy, what exactly is circulation? So it's basically subscriptions. And she did it across all magazines. So she was running it for all these different magazines as well as for the airports. And so one of the things that I talk about a lot, and I think back on sort of the journey that, again, I had no idea that I would land in working on this piece of business. But one of the pieces of business that Brooke worked on that was really interesting to publishers was this airline business. And basically it was bulk copies that went into airports and on airplanes. And it was at a time when digital advertising was just starting. And targeted advertising was just starting. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the publishers, and basically the advertising falls underneath publishers, they were super interested on getting in front of people who were, first class on American Airlines. Like, how could we target those people? So here I am, 23 years old, and I'm sitting in meetings with publishers, hearing what they care about. And I mean, it was just this amazing, amazing experience, which ultimately led me to be recruited out of time to go to a company that was kind of a later stage startup called CNN. And so that was super interesting. I think back on that experience because I had cable. I had to have cable in order to have any television in my Upper West Side apartment. And basically, CNN was in 40% of US households. I think it was in like 12% of international households. I mean, it was small. And But one of the things, I was just telling somebody the story yesterday, that we always knew when Ted Turner was in the building. He generally worked out of Atlanta, but when he came, he spent a lot of time in New York. And when he came into the building, you could just feel the energy. And it's sort of the founder energy inside of a company where, you can hear his voice sometimes, but you just know
that he's there.
He's there. And it's the visionary founders. It's the people that believe. It's the people that have put stakes in the ground around, a mission and a reason for the brand being. And it was, again, so many lessons learned from, those days at CNN, very different culturally than a Time magazine. Again, like, that's what's so fun about looking back on the experiences, because you don't necessarily know what you're seeing and what you're learning along the way, but it leaves an impression. And I think that I loved the energy of CNN. I loved the chaos of it. I loved, more than anything, I loved the build. And that's where I learned that I really loved, the building aspect. And so I met my husband, my soon-to-be husband, when I was in New York, out one night through mutual friends. And he was graduating from law school. And so after 6 years in New York, we decided he really wanted to do something called internet law. And I thought it was very interesting because a lot of people in the cable world were talking about the internet and what was going to happen. This is 1994-ish. And so he wanted to do this thing called internet law, and all of the firms in New York said, go west. Come back in a couple of years, but go west. And so that's what brought us out to San Francisco. And so I was debating whether or not I wanted to, stick with CNN and stick with cable, or if I wanted to do something else. And the one thing that my dad always instilled in me at a very young age is that brands draw people in, and they have personalities of their own, and they have to be great products and great services, but brands are what you're always safe in working with a brand, especially a brand that people find inspirational. And so when I got to San Francisco, I thought a lot about that. And I thought, what is a brand that I associate with San Francisco? I didn't really know anybody in the Bay Area. And I looked down at my computer that I had had since college, and I had an iMac, Apple. So I looked up where Apple headquarters was, and that was in Cupertino, which is about, talk about Silicon Valley, 100 miles away from where San Francisco was. So that probably wasn't going to be doable. But in my research that I was doing, I saw that there was a little spin out of it that came from Apple that was doing this thing that basically used technology in order to get people to shop. I love to shop, had no experience in the professional world in catalog or retail, but I thought so interesting. And so I picked up the phone and reached out to a gentleman who had worked at Apple that was part of this founding team that had spun out into the startup called To Market. And I said, I don't know anybody in the Bay Area. I just moved here. I was working for CNN. Before I could even finish my sentence, he said, wow, what is Ted Turner like? And he wanted to know what another founder was like. He found him inspirational. And the first thing I wanted to know was, what was Steve Jobs like? And so we agreed to have coffee. And that was sort of the start of my life in tech and in starting in my true startup world experience. So I'll stop there.
No, I mean, listen, there's a lot to digest there. And first I need to say, and what a story. Okay. You are the epitome of, if you want something, go get it. Right. So there's an author, his name's Alan Cohen, and he's written many books. He's more of a self-help type author, and he wrote a book called A Deep Breath of Life, which is one of those daily inspirational type. Every day you open to a new page and it has the date, and you read this reading. And there was one story in this entire 365 pages of a book that was entitled "Could Be Your Ring." Okay. And it tells a story about a boy and a girl who met when they were in junior high school, and he had a mammoth-sized crush on her. And he talked about how they once went roller skating and they actually held hands. But he never had the courage to ask her out. He never had the courage to be, asked to be his girlfriend or whatever. And then years later, her name was Rhoda. And years later, he runs into Rhoda. They're now all grown up. And she shows her hand. She shows him her hand again. And this time it has a ring on it. And by this time, he's built up the courage to say, I just wanted to let you know that when we were younger, I had a really big crush on you. And she said, I did too. She said, if either of us would have been a little more honest, this could have been your ring on my finger. And the moral of the story was, and the way he put it was, a prerequisite for getting what you want is asking for it. Just that one statement. A prerequisite for getting what you want is asking for it. And when you're telling your story, how you left Arizona with this letter in your hand. It reminded me of the movie where he's Dumb and Dumber, where he's like, so she goes, well, I'd say 1 out of a million I would give you, whether or not I'd go. So you're saying I have a chance, right? But I'm picturing you on a plane with this letter. You got your business clothes on. You're ready to strut into fortune. And I have my letter, and where do I start, kind of thing. But it's all about, and your book says it perfectly, just being undaunted, right? Like, what's
Yeah.
the worst that could happen? They
What's
say
the
no.
worst that can happen? Exactly. And that was something that I think, look, being the last of 5 kids, I think my parents were excellent at saying no. They had a lot of practice at, everything was just, they had heard it all and they said, no. Dad, can I go to that party? No. Can I, go to San Diego with some friends? No. They loved saying no, or at least that was my perception. And so what I realized is that if I didn't try, if I didn't ask, then it for sure wasn't going to become a reality. And so I learned that at a very, very young age. But I think, looking back, you're absolutely right. I think that the opportunities will always present themselves. But if you don't actually go for it, you'll never really know. And I think a life filled with regrets is way worse than actually one saying, I tried and it didn't work out. And I have a lot of, I tried and it didn't work out. I'm telling you the parts that worked, right? But there's a lot of times along the way, and you have to be prepared for that. But I also think sometimes when you try things and they don't work out, there's some lessons in there and there's some learnings in there too. And if nothing else, I felt like just by sitting down and grabbing lunch with somebody or coffee with somebody that I potentially wanted to work with, maybe, just maybe I could understand who Steve Jobs was. And that was my goal. My goal was not to walk in the door to get a job. My goal was actually to have a better understanding of who, this visionary leader was. And I think like that also sort of leads me to the next piece of, you asked about me as a child. I was always really curious. And it's funny, I was talking to my siblings this weekend and was reminded how I was always the welcome committee when new people moved into the neighborhood. And so I would see the moving van and I'd ride my bike up because I wanted to know if there were kids in the house. And I wanted to be the first one to meet these people. And that was sort of, me as a kid more than anything. I wanted to meet the kids, but I would end up finding out like, who are the parents? Are there 2 parents? What do they do? I would always be asking questions because I felt like if I asked questions, even if I didn't know the answers, I would learn a lot of new things. And so I was constantly coming home and sharing this with the rest of my family. They're like, how did you know that somebody was moving into the neighborhood? I'm like, well, there was a for sale sign. And then I saw the moving van. So that was always me. And I think that that's continued.
Well, and then you could be like, Mom and Dad, I'm going to be a journalist. Like, that's what journalists do. They report, right? So
Exactly.
one other random question. Do you still keep in touch with Brooke from Time?
I do, actually. Brooke is very retired, but Brooke was there. And actually, interestingly, when I wrote my book, there's a chapter in there about Marshall Loeb, and sadly, he passed away a few years ago. But his son, Michael Loeb, actually worked in the building as well. And Michael went on to do a ton of great things, including founded Entertainment Weekly magazine. And he was, anyway, so I sent him a copy of the book. And I said, by the way, there's, this chapter on your dad. This story that I wanted to work for him and never happened, but I thought you would appreciate it. And he wrote me a note back and he said, I just want you to know that my dad actually wrote that letter. And He said he always enjoyed hearing from students and people who were young and hungry and just took chances. And that's who he was. And so somehow he probably never heard that you actually wanted to meet with him, but he probably would have given you a shot. And he said, I just wanted you to know that that's who he was. So I thought that was very sweet.
What a good story. So, I mean, you've had a lot of what I would call defining moments in your journey to where you're at presently. And we only have an hour, okay? But, and I'm sure you've hit many walls, like most entrepreneurs who become huge successes. That stuff doesn't just happen overnight. There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. There's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes. Late nights, sleepless hours. People see the end result and think it's just that person got lucky, or that person came up with a great idea and now their life has changed forever. There's a lot that goes into what I would call success. And you could tell me if I'm wrong. I have a feeling I'm not, although I've been wrong many times. But there's a drive that is within us, and some people have that, and some people have it, but it lays dormant, right? But from what I'm hearing for you, you've had this drive since you were 23 years old. You've had this drive since you strutted into New York City going to make it big, even though now you're making it big in California, if it wasn't for everything you've been through on the way. So I'm curious, I know you met and had coffee, you wanted to learn about Steve Jobs. When did you decide to kind of branch off on your own? When did you come up with the concept of Hint Incorporated? And I will tell you that I am every consumer's dream, because I am that person that walks through the grocery store and sees a bright label and is like, oh, Hint, I have to have that. Oh. Even if I don't like, if they're out of the flavor I like, I'll still take it. I'll still buy it. I'm like every consumer's dream when it comes to marketing, because I love that shiny new thing in the corner that attracts me. And it could taste like garbage, which your stuff does not, but it could, and I'm still going to buy it because I like the way it looks.
Oh, I love hearing that. Well, there was a little step in between. So I mentioned that I went to this 2Market, which was a CD-ROM shopping company, very small, and one of our investors was America Online. So they acquired us after about a year and a half, and they asked me to run the shopping partnerships for this little channel that they didn't know when people were going to start to shop. This is 1996. So they weren't sure when people were going to start to shop online. So, they said, okay, she's in her 20s, she can do it. And I was allowed to do it from San Francisco. The company was actually based in Virginia, but I was running around the country to a bunch of catalogers, and instead of asking them all to be on a CD-ROM disc, and now it was a CD-ROM disc and an online service that we were actually trying to get business development or business into, I should say. So by 2001, it was $1 billion to America Online. I tell this story because another build story, and something that I think about a lot, is that the tech industry, they're always building, right? They build on the existence, right? They might change something slightly, but it's always about the future. And so I was fortunate to be able to work in an industry, and to some extent cable as well, where it was all about what's going on in the future. And it wasn't just about bringing another product into a platform. It was about creating categories. Now, I wasn't the founder of America Online or 2Market or CNN, but working for founders and working under visionary leaders and waking up and trying to figure out, how do I build this puzzle without the picture? I loved it. I loved waking up. I was energized by it. I was super excited. by it. By the time it became $1 billion in revenue for the division at America Online, I had started my family. I didn't want to be on the airplane that much. And there was a lot of tech stuff going on in the Bay Area. And I thought, maybe it's time. It's a good point to go on and do something else. I didn't know how long I was going to take off. And more than anything, I really wanted to do something that I was as passionate about as I was about direct to consumer. And so I was looking around at some of the different platforms that were out there at the time in the Bay Area, and I felt like many of them were asking me to do what I had done at AOL. And again, I wanted to build. I wanted to do something new and create. I love creating. And I just wasn't finding it. I was also spending a lot of time with my young kids. I had 3 kids under the age of 4 when I decided to start Hint. And so it was at a time when I'm trying to get my kids healthy, trying to look at everything that they're putting into their bodies. I think at one point I was at the park and I was seeing how the kids that were bouncing off the walls always had one of these sippy cups with orange juice in it or apple juice. And I thought, maybe you shouldn't give them so much sugar. Right? And I'd be on an airplane and thinking, gosh, the world would be a lot better off if they just didn't have all that sugar. And they're too young, obviously, to make these decisions. But it just was amazing to me how these parents or, caregivers didn't see what I was seeing. And so I started to look in my own house. I wasn't giving my kids tons of sugar. But what I realized is that even though I wasn't having lots of sugar, I was having diet soda. And I started to look at the label, started to look at the ingredients, and was concerned that it wasn't as clean as I was asking my kids to live by. And again, it was not really a conversation other than with myself that I just decided maybe I should eliminate it. My husband laughed because he said, "You've been drinking, let's think about this. Like, you've been drinking diet soda since you were in high school, and Diet Coke in particular. So you can't just stop." And I'm like, no. I can't have like a couple and just like think, okay, I'm just going to have it because I'll crave it. Mm-hmm. Talking about addiction behavior, right?
There we go. Yeah.
And so I said, no, I'm going to be miserable for a couple of weeks, but I'm going to do this. I'm an athlete. I know how to do this. I know how to just say no. And so I did. And what I didn't realize was that many of the health issues that I had been trying to change in my life, I'd been trying to lose some weight since I had these pregnancies. I was great at gaining weight. I was terrible at losing the weight. And also I had some skin issues that no one could figure out, and had developed terrible adult acne that I had never even had as a teenager. And so it was at that point when I woke up after 2 weeks, not the best 2 weeks of my life at all, but I had gotten over it. And I realized that the cravings that I had, and like cravings, like I used to always want to have a piece of gum. I used to always want to eat in the afternoon something sweet. Like there were these patterns that I saw. I had broken them. But in addition to that, I had lost over 20 pounds in 2.5 weeks, and my skin cleared up. So of course I wasn't going to go back to my old habits. But again, the reason, and I think this is a really important point, sometimes you set out to do a little test or try something, and you're not really sure whether or not it's going to work or not. But then you figure out other things, and you pay attention to those other things, because those other things might be the most important thing, and the lessons that you need to learn about what was actually going on inside of me. And so what I realized is that I had thought that I was doing better than I was by drinking diet. It ended up that it was actually blocking me from actually getting as healthy as I wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember walking into a grocery store after this happened, and I saw the sea of diet drinks, and also walked down the food, had some of the other food aisles, and saw that there were things like low fat. And my dad had worked for a food company, and talked about Snackwells, and I knew all these diet sweeteners that were out there that had sort of, one day it was saccharin, the next day it was NutraSweet. I knew that there was some confusion,
Aspartame,
right, about that stuff, but I just never really connected it to me, because I thought I had always thought that diet drinks were better than full-fledged sugar. And it wasn't until I did my own tests that I had really seen exactly what it was doing. And so there was still just one problem with this test. I obviously wasn't going to go back to drinking diet soda, but I was so bored with drinking plain water. I grew up in Arizona, as I mentioned before, and never drank enough water. And so I started slicing up fruit and throwing it in the water for taste. I wasn't even looking to try and create a 0-calorie drink. I was doing it for myself to get me to enjoy water. Mm-hmm. And what I realized is that I would really enjoy water as long as it had a lime, raspberries, maybe lime and raspberries, whatever it was. So people said, like, how did you figure out the flavors, the initial flavors? I didn't think that hard about it, because sometimes if you think too much about the end, you won't get past the beginning. And people would start to ask me. I became known as the flavored water friend. And people would ask me what I had in my water that day. Like, they would see a pomegranate and they'd be like, how did you make that decision? And I thought, I don't know. It was just on my counter. That's what I did. And so that was the moment that I thought, okay, it's helping me to drink water. It's helping me to get healthy. Maybe I could actually launch a drink that could actually help other people realize what I've realized. And how do you do that? Well, you get in the car and you go to your local Whole Foods, and that had just opened, beautiful store. And I asked the guy who was stocking beverages on the shelf, and I say, hey, I got to ask you something. Is this drink out there? Am I missing it? This drink with fruit and water in it? And that's when he said that there's this drink called vitamin water, and it's just like Hint. And I said, oh, no. It's very, very different. And here's why. And he was like, that is so interesting that you're telling me that. And I said, really? How so? And he said, because I've gained a bunch of weight since I started drinking vitamin water. And you're talking to me about diet and low fat, but I was drinking vitamin water because it had vitamins in it. And I never even read the rest of the label. And I said, oh, that's so interesting. Like how words pull, right? You into thinking that you're doing better and doing healthier. So I knew I was onto something at that point. And then the company launched because I said, how do I get this product on the shelf in the store? I think I kind of wanted an answer, but I didn't really think I was going to get the answer. I mean, I didn't have any experience in the beverage industry. I was a tech executive, maybe considered a media executive. But that's when he said, oh, do you mean the local, being a local producer? You're trying to figure out how to get products on the shelf at Whole Foods? And I said, sure. And he said, well, do you produce locally? And I'm thinking, in my kitchen. I've been doing it in my kitchen. Why not? And so that's when he said, just let me know when you want to bring the product in. I think it sounds like one that would do well in the store. So that was, the beginnings, the early days of Hint.
That's incredible. And so I assume at that point you moved out of your kitchen. Did you get like a little store area, like a warehouse type place where you started producing the drink, or what did that?
Well, then I really just started, you know,
Well, you had to do brand awareness, and you had to make.
No, I mean, not even. We were, this is a story I share in the book about how we came up with the name Hint. Basically, that was not the initial name that I thought that we were going to call the company. I found out shortly after I wrote the business plan that I was pregnant with my fourth child.
Oh.
And so I thought my timeline will be before he's born to get it on the shelf, because maybe I can take a little time off because I'm going to be busy having four kids under 6 at that point. And so I think I had just been too much in kidland, and I had this idea that the company would be called Wawa. And so I decided it was probably a pretty good time to share with my husband that I not only was going to launch a beverage company, I hadn't really told him that I had been writing this little business plan and trying to figure out how to get this company or this product produced, but also that I was pregnant with our fourth. And so I dropped all of that on his plate one afternoon. And he's an intellectual property attorney. I thought he can help me register the name for this drink idea that I've got. And so I told him that the company will be called Wawa. Can you help me get this registered? He grew up in New York, not on the West Coast, and so knew
Right.
that there was this large convenience store chain in Pennsylvania called Wawa. And he said, that's a terrible idea. Do not call it Wawa. If this thing takes off, they will sue you. And so again, I wasn't too happy with his naysaying, doubting me that I could go and do this. And so that's when I decided to drop the bomb on him that I was actually pregnant with our fourth as well, which of course he thought was, I probably was going to be institutionalized at this point. He couldn't believe that I was thinking about starting a company. But it was at that moment when I sort of was sharing with him, he felt bad for me that here I am, like really energized, really excited, wanting to launch a company with a purpose that could really help people. He had seen how much this product that I had been making in my kitchen had helped me. And so he loved the idea of it. And of course, loved the idea that I was excited. But he said, just keep talking to me about some of the other names. And that's when I talked to him about Hint. And that I said, we're giving people lots of hints. There's, all kinds of reasons. And all of a sudden I said, let's do that one. That just sounds great. And he laughed. He said, you'll never it's a 4-letter word. You're never going to get that registered. And so the moral of that story is don't always listen to your husband lawyer because we did get it registered. And the rest is history. So, but I think, there's a few lessons along the way, I think, in my journey, which I think are pretty relevant and important to many people, is that life is about trying. And for sure, you will probably have more failures than successes, but you will never get to those successes if you don't try. And it's inevitable that you're going to have some things that aren't going to work out exactly the way that you wanted them to work out. Now, in some of those so-called failures, you might think that things are a disaster, a failure along the way, but it is your opportunity to look at those experiences and figure out, is there anything there, right? Is there anything that I can learn from? Can I build on? Can I, maybe there's people that you met along the way that helps you to do something now or do something later. And then finally, I think the key thing that I've learned is that experience in any industry is not necessarily where you're going to find the visionary entrepreneurs that are actually going to change the landscape. And they are the ones that don't draw between the lines. They are the ones that figure, what do I have to lose? And all of those things that I've shared today, I share in my book, and sort of share the story and the journey, because I feel like so many people block themselves from actually finding what they're truly capable of, because they fear failure. They get blocked by this word experience. They don't believe in themselves enough to actually just go out and see what might happen. And I think if more people did that, we would see a lot more creativity. We would see a lot more great things happen in the world that only a few of us can imagine, right? So that's my big takeaways.
I love that. You have shared so much that I'm still kind of digesting, okay, and processing. And you are the atypical guest that we would normally have on the Rhyme and Reason podcast. Okay, we're typically speaking with people who have gone through some type of addiction or mental health crisis, um, and offer and I think I mentioned this when we first started, just a really good story of redemption. Okay, what you're sharing today is just as inspirational as somebody who has struggled mightily, maybe wound up in prison, is now running a company, right? That what you shared today, that you are literally self-built. Okay. One of 5 kids, the youngest, always being told no. You literally grabbed world by the balls and took it for yourself. And I can't remember a guest we've had on that has been more inspirational.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, and I mean that sincerely, right? I mean, you're not a trust fund kid. You don't come from, mega wealth where everything was handed to you or given to you or the connections were made for you. You are what I would consider the epitome of what drive looks like. And I say that again with the most sincerity. And I think that the stories that you have shared today have definitely impacted the listeners. I'm receiving text messages as this show is going on, and I have my phone on Do Not Disturb. So, but I can still see the numbers that are climbing on my messages, and it is really it's really cool, Kara. I mean,
Thank you.
and then on top of it, you're humble.
Oh, thank you.
You don't forget your roots. You don't forget where you come from, right? You don't forget those people who were instrumental in the start of your journey. And for random dudes who reach out to you on LinkedIn, inviting you on their podcast, you graciously accept. And not only do you accept, but you send goodies to their house. Like,
Oh, thank
that
you.
was really sweet. I got a book. I got a dog toy. I got lip balm. I got things, lanyard kind of things to hang around your. I got a lot of cool stuff. By the way, the dog toy went to my ex because they have a Great Dane, and it became his favorite toy.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, so he is now healthy with Hint. And just so you're aware, and I know you run a huge company, at Recovery Unplugged, we literally spend every day helping others, right? So that is our mission. It's done through music, and it's done in a really creative way. And there's a lot of issues in the workplace, and there are. My only time going to Silicon Valley was I went out and was invited to speak with the employees out at Samsung. And that was a really interesting day for me because I was literally chased around their campus by a robot who was their security guard.
That's hysterical. Oh my
Yeah,
God.
and
Funny.
they have nap pods, and they have like this whole area for the employees. So I don't know if you guys have nap pods or if that's a thing
We don't.
um, out in California, but I thought that was super cool. Normally, I would also say, can you tell our viewers where to find your product? But it's everywhere, and I don't know how you've managed that, but literally, like, it's in Publix. I don't think you guys have Publix in California, but Publix is our shopping
Yep.
grocery store here,
It's all over.
it's
Definitely.
and I'm a huge fan also of sparkling water. Do you guys have a sparkling product?
Yep. There is Hint Fizz, and
Love
yeah, and there's also a Hint Energy. With
I
some,
was going to ask you about that because probably the hardest part about the whole Diet Coke thing, I'm sure part of it was some of the caffeine, right? Letting go of that caffeine.
it's a longer story, but I think for me it was the bubbles, and that's what I think a lot of people talk about. Addiction. I think that a lot of people think that they'll really, really miss the caffeine part of it. I think caffeine is actually pretty easy to break. But the interesting thing that I found was that the bubbles, I miss the bubbles a lot. And it's really, it's a stimulation. So, and it
I
like,
love the bubbles.
but I think people confuse it. They think like, oh God, I could never do that. But you actually can. And I think you have to try. So,
Are you a fan of the Hint Fizz?
I love it. I mean, all the products, I've been part of creating it. Of course, I've got a great team that has been a part of creating it over time. My husband, I recruited him to be the chief operating officer of the company, which was, had been never had thought that was going to happen, that I'd be working with my husband, but a lot of fun. But I'm going to have to run.
We're done.
Yeah, but
We're done.
I loved meeting you, and I hope that everybody who hasn't tried Hint will get a chance to try it. You can get it in stores, as you mentioned, also Amazon, drinkhint.com. And then my book is called Undaunted, Overcoming Doubts and Doubters. And I think whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're just not sure whether or not you can, I think it's a story of trying, of getting through tough times, getting through your own doubts about yourself and doubts that others have about you, and just going out and making it happen. So
I love that. And real quick too, I know you have to jump. I know you also have a podcast. Do you want to kind of share with the viewers how they could find that?
So it's called The Kara Goldin Show, and it's on all platforms, but Apple, Spotify. It's 3 days a week, and I interview incredible founders who are really sharing their stories of why they did it, and the stories that go along with it too. Because what I found is that it's never a straight line. There's super highs, there's super lows. I've had people listen who never knew this about entrepreneurs, but there's lots of lessons along the way and lots of inspiration. So hopefully you'll get a chance to listen. And it's now in the top 1% of entrepreneur podcasts in the world, which is super, super cool. So,
Which does not surprise me.
Yeah, so I'm excited to share that.
Kara, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have you on here. It's been an honor, and thank you for all that you do, and keep doing what you're doing. That's
Thank you.
incredible. Thank you so much.
Again.